In a small, forgotten town on the outskirts of civilization, where poverty and despair ruled the streets, corruption thrived like a disease. The local police force was not there to protect or serve, but to intimidate and exploit. Among them were 3 officers, Captain Marcus Vane, Sergeant Rick Hale, and Officer Derek Lane, who had grown bored with their usual methods of terrorizing the townspeople. Their cruelty knew no bounds, and they often found amusement in the suffering of others. On one particularly cold and moonless night, the trio sat in their patrol car, sipping cheap whiskey from a flask and laughing about their latest exploits. They had spent most of the evening harassing shopkeepers and extorting money from street vendors. But as the hours dragged on, their entertainment began to feel hollow. They craved something more exciting, something that would make their hearts race and their laughter echo louder. It was then that they spotted him, a stranger walking alone down the deserted road. His clothes were worn but clean, his steps steady and his face calm despite the chaos around him. He carried no bag, no weapon, nothing that suggested he belonged to this desolate place. Curiosity piqued, the officers decided to investigate. Pulling up beside him, Captain Vane rolled down the window and barked, "Hey you! Stop right there!" The man obeyed without hesitation, turning to face them with an expression that was neither fearful nor defiant. "Can I help you?" he asked politely, his voice calm and measured. Vane frowned. There was something unsettling about the way the man spoke, as if he held some kind of secret knowledge. Determined to assert dominance, Vane stepped out of the car and approached him. "Who are you and what are you doing here?" "My name is Jonathan Reed," the man replied. "I'm just passing through." "Passing through?" Vane sneered. "This isn't exactly a tourist destination, pal. You better have a good reason for being here." Jonathan shrugged. "I don't need a reason. I'm not causing any trouble." His calm demeanor only irritated Vane further. Turning to his companions, he said, "See this guy? Acts all innocent, but I bet he's up to something. Let's take him in for questioning." Hale and Lane exchanged glances but didn't argue. They were used to following Vane's lead, no matter how unjustified it might be. Together they shoved Jonathan into the back seat of the patrol car and drove off toward the edge of town. Their destination was an abandoned warehouse that served as their unofficial torture chamber. It was a place where screams went unheard and evidence disappeared forever. As they dragged Jonathan inside, the air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long. The officers paid no attention to these details. Their minds were focused solely on the fun they planned to have. Once inside, they pushed Jonathan onto a rickety chair and surrounded him. Vane leaned in close, his breath reeking of alcohol. "All right, buddy, let's cut the crap." "What are you really doing here?" "I told you," Jonathan replied evenly. "I'm just passing through." "That's not good enough," Vane snapped, slapping him across the face. Hale and Lane laughed at the display, egging Vane on. Emboldened by their support, Vane struck Jonathan again, harder this time. But instead of cowering or begging for mercy, Jonathan simply stared at them, his eyes unreadable. "What's wrong with you?" Vane demanded, growing increasingly frustrated. "Aren't you scared?" "No," Jonathan said softly. "Should I be?" His response infuriated Vane even more. Grabbing a nearby bottle of gasoline, he poured it over Jonathan's belongings, which had been confiscated during the arrest. "How about now?" he taunted, striking a match. The flames leapt to life, consuming the items in seconds. But instead of recoiling in fear, Jonathan remained eerily composed. This only fueled the officer's rage. Determined to break him, they doused him with gasoline and lit another match. As the fire engulfed him, Vane, Hale, and Lane erupted in cruel laughter. But their amusement quickly turned to shock as Jonathan stood unharmed amidst the inferno. His skin shimmered faintly and his eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. "You've made a grave mistake," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. Before they could react, he vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the scent of burning fuel and the lingering feeling of dread. Stunned and terrified, the officers stumbled backward, their laughter replaced by silence. None of them dared to speak as the reality of what they had just witnessed sank in. Who or what was Jonathan Reed? And what would happen next? For the rest of the night, they sat in stunned silence, unable to shake the image of those glowing eyes or the ominous words that still echoed in their minds. Little did they know, their lives, and the fate of humanity itself, were about to change forever. The days that followed the warehouse incident were tense and uneasy for Captain Marcus Vane, Sergeant Rick Hale, and Officer Derek Lane. They tried to convince themselves that what they had seen was nothing more than a hallucination brought on by too much whiskey and late-night paranoia. But deep down, they knew better. The memory of Jonathan Reed standing unharmed in the flames haunted them every waking moment. His glowing eyes and chilling words echoed in their minds like a curse they couldn't escape. To distract themselves, they threw themselves into their usual routine, patrolling the streets, harassing shopkeepers, and extorting money from anyone who crossed their path. Yet no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching them. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long at dusk. Whispers filled the air when no one else was around, and strange things began happening at the police station. Files disappeared without explanation, chairs creaked even when empty, and faint footsteps echoed through the halls at night. At first, they dismissed it all as stress-induced imagination. But as the weird occurrences grew more frequent, fear began to take root. None of them dared to speak openly about it, but they could see the unease in each other's eyes. It was as if the town itself had turned against them, punishing them for what they had done. Then one morning everything changed. A black sedan pulled up outside the police station, its sleek design standing out starkly against the dusty, crumbling buildings of the town. Out stepped a man dressed in a crisp suit, his posture commanding and his presence undeniable. He carried himself with an air of authority that demanded respect, yet there was something unsettling about him, something familiar. The officers exchanged nervous glances as he entered the building. Without hesitation, he strode straight to the precinct commander's office and introduced himself. "I'm Jonathan Reed," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Effective immediately, I'll be taking over as your new sheriff." Vane, Hale, and Lane froze. Their faces went pale as they stared at the man standing before them. It was impossible. It had to be. But there was no denying it. This was the same Jonathan Reed they had tormented, beaten, and set on fire just weeks ago. And yet, here he was, alive and well, looking as if nothing had happened. No one dared to question how this could be possible. Instead, the officers muttered weak protests under their breath, claiming that such a sudden change in leadership wasn't protocol. But Jonathan silenced them with a single glance. His piercing eyes locked onto each of them in turn, sending shivers down their spines. "There won't be any objections," he said evenly. "You will follow my orders without question. Is that understood?" Reluctantly, they nodded. There was something about the way he spoke, his tone measured but laced with an unspoken threat, that left no room for argument. From the moment Jonathan took charge, it became clear that things would never be the same again. He wasted no time implementing sweeping changes. Corruption, which had been rampant under the previous administration, was rooted out mercilessly. Criminals who had operated freely for years were arrested and brought to justice. Citizens who had lived in fear for so long suddenly found themselves protected and heard. Word of the transformation spread quickly throughout the town. People marveled at how efficiently crimes were solved and how fairly disputes were resolved. For the first time in decades, hope began to bloom in a place that had long been consumed by despair. But for Vane, Hale, and Lane, life under Jonathan's rule felt like living in a nightmare. Every order he gave, every decision he made, seemed designed to remind them of their guilt. He assigned them the most grueling tasks, forced them to work longer hours than anyone else, and held them accountable for even the smallest mistakes. Worst of all, he watched them constantly, his glowing eyes following their every move. Their paranoia reached new heights as strange incidents continued to plague them. Files related to old cases mysteriously vanished from their desks, leaving them scrambling to explain gaps in evidence. Tools and equipment they relied on malfunctioned at critical moments, causing public embarrassment. And late at night, when the station was empty, eerie whispers filled the air, whispering their names over and over again. Desperate for answers, they began researching Jonathan's background, hoping to uncover some clue about who, or what, he really was. But their efforts yielded nothing. There were no records of his existence prior to his arrival in town, no photos, no documents, nothing. It was as if he had appeared out of thin air. One evening, after another exhausting day of trying and failing to keep up with Jonathan's demands, the three officers gathered in the break room. The atmosphere was heavy with tension as they sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Hale broke the quiet. "This isn't normal," he muttered, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "He's not human. I don't know what he is, but he's not human." "Don't say that," Lane snapped, though his voice trembled. "We don't know what he is. Maybe we imagined it. That night in the warehouse. It could have been the booze messing with us." Vane shook his head. "No, you saw it, too. He stood in those flames like it was nothing, and now he's here, acting like he owns the place. What does he want from us? Why hasn't he killed us yet?" "He's playing with us," Hale whispered, "like we're rats in a maze. He wants us to suffer." For a while, none of them spoke. The weight of their guilt pressed down on them, heavier than ever before. They had always known they were bad people, but until now, they had never truly faced the consequences of their actions. Now, with Jonathan watching their every move, they felt trapped in a cycle of punishment they couldn't escape. As the days turned into weeks, their desperation grew. They began skipping meals, unable to stomach food. Sleep eluded them, plagued by nightmares of burning flames and glowing eyes. Their once cocky demeanor crumbled, replaced by anxiety and fear. Even the townspeople noticed the change, whispering among themselves about how the notorious trio had become shadows of their former selves. Despite their misery, Jonathan remained unmoved. He treated them with cold indifference, never offering praise or sympathy. When they completed a task successfully, he simply nodded and moved on to the next assignment. When they failed, he reprimanded them harshly, reminding them of their past sins. "You are not heroes," he often said, his tone icy. "You are penitents seeking redemption. Do not confuse the two." His words cut deeper than any physical punishment could. Slowly but surely, the officers realized that their only chance of survival lay in proving themselves worthy of forgiveness, not just to Jonathan, but to the entire town. And so, reluctantly, they began to change. Under Jonathan's strict supervision, they worked tirelessly to undo the damage they had caused. They helped rebuild homes destroyed by their negligence, protected the vulnerable from criminals they had once ignored, and brought down other corrupt officials who had hidden in plain sight. At first, their efforts were driven by fear rather than genuine remorse. But as they saw the impact of their actions, the smiles returning to children's faces, the gratitude in the eyes of the elderly, they started to feel something they hadn't felt in years: purpose. Still, Jonathan's presence loomed large over everything they did. He never praised their progress, only reminded them of the stakes. "Your actions will decide whether humanity deserves salvation," he told them one evening. "Do not waste this opportunity." Though their journey toward redemption had only just begun, Vane, Hale, and Lane knew they were being given a second chance, a rare gift in a world where justice was often blind. Whether they could seize it, however, remained to be seen. For now they worked, hoping against hope that their efforts would be enough to appease the enigmatic man who had come to judge them, and perhaps the entire human race. Weeks turned into months, and the town continued to transform under Jonathan Reed's leadership. Once a place of fear and despair, it now buzzed with newfound energy. Streets that had been littered with trash were cleaned, businesses reopened their doors, and people walked with a sense of safety they hadn't felt in years. It was as if a dark cloud had lifted, leaving behind clear skies and fresh air. But for Captain Marcus Vane, Sergeant Rick Hale, and Officer Derek Lane, The changes brought little comfort. Every day under Jonathan's watchful eye felt like another step closer to an unknown fate. They worked tirelessly, following his orders without question, hoping to prove themselves worthy of redemption. Yet no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't shake the feeling that Jonathan wasn't entirely satisfied. His piercing gaze followed them everywhere, reminding them of their past sins and the price they might still have to pay. One evening, after yet another grueling shift, Jonathan summoned the 3 officers to his office. The room was dimly lit, casting long shadows across the walls. Papers and files were neatly stacked on his desk, but none of them paid attention to the details. Their focus was entirely on Jonathan, who sat silently behind the desk, his glowing eyes fixed on them. "Sit," he commanded, his voice calm, yet commanding. They obeyed immediately, sinking into the chairs in front of him. None of them dared to speak. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to choke on. Finally, Jonathan broke the silence. "I owe you an explanation," he began, his tone steady but chilling. "You deserve to know why I am here and why your actions matter more than you can imagine." Vane swallowed hard, his throat dry. What do you mean?" Jonathan leaned forward slightly, his glowing eyes intensifying. "I am not from this world," he said plainly, as if stating a fact about the weather. "I came to Earth as part of a cosmic evaluation, a test to determine whether humanity is ready to join the galactic community." The officers stared at him, stunned. For a moment, none of them could find the words to respond. Then Hale stammered, You're an alien?" Jonathan nodded. "Yes. But my presence here is not merely for observation. My mission is to assess whether your species is capable of rising above its flaws, its greed, cruelty, and selfishness, or whether it is doomed to remain trapped in darkness." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "When I first arrived, I chose to blend in, to observe humanity in its natural state. And then I encountered you 3. His gaze hardened, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Your cruelty toward me that night, the fire, the mockery, the violence, it revealed something far darker than I had anticipated. You represent the worst aspects of your kind: corruption, malice, and a complete disregard for life." Vane, Hale, and Lane shifted uncomfortably in their seats, guilt washing over them like a tidal wave. They wanted to protest, to argue that they weren't always like that, but the truth hung heavy in the air. They knew exactly what Jonathan was talking about. "But," Jonathan continued, his tone softening slightly, "you also represent something else, the potential for change. Since that night, you have worked to undo the damage you caused. You've helped rebuild homes, protected the vulnerable, and rooted out corruption within your ranks. These actions suggest that even the worst among you are capable of seeking redemption." Hale found the courage to speak. Does that mean we're forgiven?" Jonathan shook his head. "Forgiveness is not mine to give. What matters now is whether humanity as a whole can rise to meet the challenge. Your efforts will serve as evidence, one way or another." Vane frowned, his mind racing. "Evidence? For what? Who decides if we pass or fail?" "The decision lies with the Galactic Council," Jonathan replied. "They oversee countless civilizations across the stars, determining which are worthy of joining the interstellar community. If humanity proves itself capable of growth and compassion, Earth will be welcomed among the stars. If not..." He trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Lane's voice trembled as he asked, "And what happens to us if we fail?" Jonathan's expression remained unreadable. "Failure would mean isolation. Humanity would remain confined to this planet, cut off from the rest of the universe. Worse still, it could lead to intervention, measures taken to prevent further harm." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Intervention sounded ominous, though none of them dared to ask for clarification. Instead, Vane spoke up again. "So, what happens now? What do we need to do?" "You must continue proving yourselves," Jonathan said firmly. "Every action you take, every choice you make will be weighed carefully. Redemption is not given lightly. It must be earned. And remember, your efforts alone are not enough. Humanity as a whole must demonstrate its worthiness. With that, Jonathan dismissed them, leaving the three officers to process everything they had just learned. As they left the office, their minds raced with questions and fears. Was Jonathan truly giving them a chance, or was he simply delaying their punishment? Could humanity really rise above its flaws, or was it doomed to fail? Facing the shadows. Over the next few days, Vane, Hale, and Lance threw themselves into their work with renewed determination. They patrolled the streets, assisted residents, and cracked down on crime harder than ever before. But despite their efforts, doubt lingered in their minds. Late one night, unable to sleep, the trio gathered in the break room once again. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the table. Cups of cold coffee sat, untouched, as they discussed their predicament. "He's not human," Hale muttered, breaking the silence. "We already knew that, but hearing him say it outright, it makes it real." "And what he said about the Galactic Council," Lane added, shuddering. "Do you think they're watching us right now? Like, judging us?" Vane ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "I don't know. Maybe. All I know is that we can't screw this up. If we do, it's not just our lives on the line. It's everyone's." For a while, none of them spoke. The weight of responsibility pressed down on them heavier than ever before. They had always thought of themselves as insignificant cogs in a broken machine, but now they realized they played a crucial role in deciding humanity's fate. Finally, Hale spoke up. "We've done bad things, really bad things, but maybe this is our chance to make it right. Not just for us, but for everyone." Lane nodded slowly. "Yeah. If we keep working hard, maybe we can show them that we're better than they think." Vane sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's not going to be easy. Jonathan's not going to let us off the hook anytime soon. But if it means saving ourselves, and maybe the whole damn planet, then we don't have a choice." As they sat there, plotting their next moves, they realized something important. For the first time in their lives, they were fighting for something bigger than themselves. Redemption wasn't just about escaping punishment. It was about proving that humanity was worth saving. A glimmer of hope. Their resolve strengthened. The officers returned to their duties with a renewed sense of purpose. They worked longer hours, pushed themselves harder, and sought out opportunities to make a difference. Slowly but surely, their reputation began to change. People who had once feared them now approached them with gratitude, thanking them for their help. Even Jonathan noticed the shift. Though he never praised them outright, his demeanor softened slightly. The eerie whispers that had plagued them at night grew quieter, and the strange occurrences at the station became less frequent. It was as if their efforts were earning them a small measure of peace. Still, they knew the road ahead would be difficult. Humanity's flaws ran deep, and the challenges they faced were far from over. But for the first time, Vane, Hale, and Lane allowed themselves to hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, they could rise above their past mistakes and earn the forgiveness they so desperately sought. And somewhere among the stars, Jonathan watched, waiting to see if humanity was truly ready to join the galactic community, or if it would remain trapped in the shadows of its own making. As the weeks turned into months, Captain Marcus Vane, Sergeant Rick Hale, and Officer Derek Lane continued their relentless pursuit of redemption. Under Jonathan Reed's watchful eye, they worked tirelessly to prove that humanity, starting with themselves, was capable of change. Their days were filled with long hours patrolling the streets, resolving disputes, and protecting the vulnerable. Nights were spent reflecting on their past actions and planning how to make amends. But despite their efforts, doubt lingered in their minds like a shadow they couldn't shake. Was it enough? Would their actions truly matter in the grand scheme of things? And what would happen if they failed, not just them, but all of humanity? These questions haunted them every waking moment, driving them to push harder, do more, and strive for something greater than themselves. A town transformed. The transformation of the town was undeniable. Where once fear ruled the streets, hope now flourished. Shopkeepers no longer hid behind locked doors. Children played freely in the parks, and residents greeted one another with smiles instead of wary glances. The officers' dedication to justice had inspired others to step up as well. Volunteers cleaned up neighborhoods, community centers reopened, and people began looking out for one another in ways they hadn't before. Even those who had once despised Vane, Hale, and Lane now acknowledged their efforts. Former victims of their cruelty approached them hesitantly at first, thanking them for their recent work. Some even offered forgiveness, though it came with lingering skepticism. "I don't trust you," one woman said bluntly after Hale helped her recover stolen property. "But I can see you're trying. That counts for something." These moments fueled the officers' determination. For the first time in their lives, they felt a sense of purpose beyond personal gain. They weren't doing this for praise or recognition. They were doing it because they believed it mattered. Yet Jonathan remained an enigma. He never praised their progress, only reminded them of the stakes. "You are penitents seeking redemption," he often said during briefings. "Do not mistake your efforts for absolution. Humanity's fate still hangs in the balance." His words weighed heavily on them, but they also served as motivation. If there was even a chance to save humanity and themselves, they were willing to take it. Whispers in the dark. Despite their outward success, strange occurrences continued to plague the officers. Late at night, when the station was empty and the world outside silent, eerie whispers echoed through the halls. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and cold drafts swept through rooms with no open windows. At first, they dismissed these events as stress-induced hallucinations, but eventually they realized they were real, or at least as real as anything involving Jonathan could be. One particularly restless evening, Vane found himself alone in the precinct's evidence room, sorting through old files. As he worked, he heard a faint whisper behind him. Turning quickly, he saw nothing but darkness. Shaking his head, he returned to his task, only to hear the whisper again, this time louder, clearer. "Marcus," it called, sending chills down his spine. He spun around, heart pounding, but the room remained empty. The voice came again, softer now, almost sympathetic. "You cannot undo the past, but you can shape the future." Vane froze, recognizing the tone. It wasn't threatening. It was a reminder, a challenge. Slowly, he nodded to himself, as if acknowledging the unseen presence. "I understand," he whispered back. When he emerged from the evidence room minutes later, pale and shaken, Hale and Lane immediately noticed. "What happened?" Hale asked, concern etched on his face. I think we're being tested," Vane replied quietly. "Not just by Jonathan, but by something bigger, something watching us." Lane frowned. "You mean the Galactic Council?" Vane shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe it's something else. Either way, we have to keep going. We can't stop now." Hale nodded grimly. "Agreed. Whatever's out there, it's waiting to see if we'll give up. We can't let that happen." Doubts and determination. Though their resolve strengthened, doubts still crept in during quiet moments. One afternoon, while patrolling the outskirts of town, Hale pulled over to stare at the horizon. The vast expanse of fields stretched endlessly before him, bathed in golden sunlight. It was beautiful, but it also made him feel small, insignificant. "What, if we're not good enough?" he muttered aloud, unaware that Lane was standing nearby. Lane walked over, leaning against the patrol car. "You thinking about what Jonathan said? About humanity proving itself?" Hale nodded. "Yeah, I mean, look at us. 3 corrupt cops who burned a guy alive for fun. How does that scream worthy of joining the stars?" Lane sighed, crossing his arms. It doesn't. But maybe that's the point. Maybe they're testing whether we can rise above our worst instincts, whether we can show them that we're better than our mistakes. Hale chuckled bitterly. Easier said than done. Yeah, Lane admitted. But we've got no choice. If we quit now, we're screwed. And so is everyone else. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a child laughing in the distance. Both men turned to see a group of kids playing soccer in a field. They looked carefree, happy, everything the town used to lack. Look at them, Lane said softly. That's why we're doing this. Not for us, but for them. For everyone who deserves a better future. Hale smiled faintly. You're right. Let's keep moving. A test of faith. The officers' journey toward redemption reached a critical turning point one fateful morning. As they reported for duty, Jonathan summoned them to his office once again. This time, however, the atmosphere felt different. The air was charged with tension and Jonathan's expression was unreadable. You've come far, he began, his voice calm but serious. Your actions have shown that even the worst among you can seek redemption, but your test is not yet complete. Vane frowned. What do you mean? What more do we need to do? Jonathan stood, walking to the window and gazing out at the town below. Humanity's flaws run deep. Greed, hatred, violence, they are part of your nature. To prove yourselves worthy, you must confront these flaws head-on. You must show that you are capable of resisting temptation, of choosing compassion over cruelty, even when it is difficult. Hale swallowed hard. And if we fail? Jonathan turned to face them, his glowing eyes piercing. Failure would mean isolation, for Earth and its people. But remember, redemption is not given lightly. It must be earned through sacrifice, courage, and unwavering determination. With that, he handed each of them a sealed envelope. Inside were instructions for their final test, a series of challenges designed to push them to their limits. Each task required them to face their darkest impulses, to choose between selfishness and selflessness, between destruction and creation. As they left the office, envelopes clutched tightly in their hands, the officers exchanged uneasy glances. They knew the road ahead would be fraught with difficulty, but they also knew they had no choice. Failure was not an option. Hope amidst uncertainty. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Vane, Hale, and Lane gathered on the roof of the police station. The cool breeze carried the sounds of laughter and music from the town below, a stark contrast to the weight pressing on their shoulders. We've been given a second chance, Vane said finally, breaking the silence. A lot of people don't get that. We owe it to ourselves and to everyone else to make the most of it. Hale nodded. Yeah, no matter how hard it gets, we can't give up. Not now. Lane grinned weakly. Let's just hope we're ready for whatever comes next. As they stood there united by their shared purpose, they allowed themselves a moment of hope. For the first time in their lives, they believed, not just in themselves, but in humanity's ability to rise above its flaws. Somewhere among the stars, Jonathan watched, waiting to see if they would succeed. And somewhere deeper in the cosmos, the Galactic Council prepared to deliver their verdict. The fate of humanity hung in the balance. But for now, the officers held on to hope. After all, redemption wasn't just about earning forgiveness. It was about proving that even the broken could be rebuilt, that even the lost could find their way home. The final test began without warning, and it was unlike anything Captain Marcus Vane, Sergeant Rick Hale, and Officer Derek Lane had ever faced. The tasks outlined in the sealed envelopes Jonathan had given them were deceptively simple on paper, but deeply challenging in practice. Each challenge forced them to confront their darkest impulses, past mistakes, and lingering fears. It wasn't just about proving themselves worthy of redemption, it was about showing that humanity itself could rise above its flaws. Task 1. Temptation. Vane's first task took him to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, the same place where they had tormented Jonathan months ago. As he stepped inside, memories flooded back, sharp and painful. The smell of gasoline, the sound of cruel laughter, the sight of flames engulfing a man who should have died but didn't. All of it came rushing back like a tidal wave. In the center of the room stood a table laden with money, stacks of cash, piled high, gleaming under dim lights. A note lay beside it, written in Jonathan's precise handwriting. "Take what you desire. No one will know." For a moment, Vane hesitated. He thought about all the times he'd taken bribes, extorted shopkeepers, and lined his pockets at the expense of others. This was easy money, untraceable, untouchable. No one would ever find out. But then he remembered the faces of the people he'd hurt, the shopkeeper whose livelihood he'd destroyed, the child whose father he'd arrested for no reason, the elderly woman who had begged him for help but received only cruelty. His hands trembled as he clenched them into fists. "No," he whispered aloud, stepping away from the table. "I won't do it again." As soon as the words left his lips, the money vanished, replaced by a faint glow emanating from the floor. Written in glowing letters were the words, "You resisted temptation. Step forward." Relief washed over Vane, but he knew this was only the beginning. There were more challenges ahead, each one designed to test his resolve. Task 2. Forgiveness. Hale's task brought him face to face with someone he never expected to see again, a man named Thomas Grayson, whom he had once beaten nearly to death during a drunken rampage years earlier. Grayson now sat in a wheelchair, his body frail and broken, yet his eyes burned with quiet strength. "I've been waiting for this moment," Grayson said calmly, as Hale entered the room. "Tell me, Rick Hale, are you sorry for what you did?" Hale's throat tightened. He wanted to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, but he couldn't find the words. Instead, he dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry," he choked out finally. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I swear I'll spend the rest of my life making up for what I've done." To his surprise, Grayson smiled faintly. "Apologies mean nothing unless they're backed by action. Show me that you've changed and maybe I'll believe you." Over the next hour, Hale recounted every step he had taken to undo the damage he had caused. Not just to Grayson, but to countless others. He spoke of the homes he had helped rebuild, the criminals he had brought to justice, and the lives he had saved. By the time he finished, Grayson nodded slowly. "I can see the change in you," Grayson said. "Maybe there's hope for you after all." With those words, the room dissolved into light, leaving Hale standing alone but filled with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Task 3. Sacrifice Lane's challenge was perhaps the hardest of all. He found himself in a crowded marketplace surrounded by screaming civilians as fire broke out in several buildings. Flames licked at rooftops, smoke filled the air, and panic spread like wildfire. A voice echoed in his mind, clear and commanding. "Save them, or save yourself." Without hesitation, Lane sprang into action. He ran toward the chaos, helping people escape burning buildings, carrying children to safety, and guiding panicked families to open ground. Time seemed to blur as he worked tirelessly, ignoring the heat searing his skin and the exhaustion weighing down his limbs. Finally, when the last person was safe, Lane collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. Around him, survivors cheered and thanked him, but he barely heard them. All he could think about was how different this moment felt compared to the night he had tormented Jonathan. Back then, he had chosen cruelty over kindness. Now he had chosen sacrifice over self-preservation. As the fires died down and the crowd dispersed, a soft glow enveloped Lane. Once again, glowing words appeared before him. "You chose others over yourself. Step forward." We declared the final verdict. When all 3 officers completed their tasks, they were summoned to the town square at dawn. The entire population had gathered, whispering among themselves as they waited for Jonathan to appear. The sky above was painted in hues of gold and crimson, casting an ethereal glow over the scene. Jonathan emerged from the crowd, his presence commanding silence. Behind him stood representatives of the Galactic Council, tall, luminous beings whose forms shimmered like starlight. Their arrival sent ripples of awe and fear through the townspeople. "You three," Jonathan began, addressing Vane, Hale, and Lane directly, "have faced your greatest fears and proven that redemption is possible, even for those who have committed the worst sins. Your actions have shown that humanity is capable of growth, compassion, and courage." He paused, turning to address the crowd. "This town stands as proof that even the darkest places can be transformed by light. Humanity's flaws run deep, but so does its potential for greatness." The Galactic Council stepped forward, their voices resonating in perfect harmony. "We have observed your species closely. While much work remains, we see promise in your ability to overcome adversity and strive for betterment. Earth shall be granted provisional membership within the galactic community under continued evaluation." Cheers erupted across the square, tears streaming down faces as people embraced one another. For the first time, humanity had been given a chance to join something greater than itself. But Jonathan's gaze remained fixed on the three officers. "Your journey is far from over," he said softly. "Redemption is not a destination. It is a lifelong pursuit. Continue to fight for good, and perhaps one day you will earn true absolution." With that, Jonathan and the council vanished into thin air, leaving behind a transformed world brimming with hope. A new beginning in. The days that followed, life in the town returned to normal. But it was a new kind of normal. People carried themselves with pride, knowing they had played a part in earning Earth's place among the stars. Vane, Hale, and Lane continued their work, driven not by fear or guilt, but by a genuine desire to make a difference. Though they still bore the weight of their past mistakes, they also carried the knowledge that redemption was possible. They had been given a second chance, and they weren't going to waste it. Somewhere among the stars, Jonathan watched, satisfied that humanity had taken its first step toward a brighter future. And somewhere deeper in the cosmos, the Galactic Council prepared to guide Earth along its new path, one filled with challenges, growth, and endless possibilities. For Vane, Hale, and Lane, redemption wasn't just about escaping punishment. It was about proving that even the broken could become whole, that even the lost could find their way home. And as they looked up at the night sky, now alive with the promise of connection, they allowed themselves to believe, for the first time, that anything was possible. Humanity's story was far from over, but for now it was a story worth telling.